Hi guys, Tammy here with Little with Great Love. So excited to be here to talk with you a little bit about shame and how shame can really hamper our freedom. If you've been with us for the last couple of weeks, you know we've talked a lot on identity. I'm going to recommend, and I'll put it down below, Lisa Martinez and I did a vlog very similar to this on the Strengths Finder and using this simple test from the people like Gallup to find out what your strengths are, to live in your identity. So my vlog today is, talking a little bit from that space of what shame am I living under that keeps me from really being confident in the person who I am. I'll share with you a book I've been reading recently, and I've been reading snippets at a time. It's called The Gifts of Imperfection. It's by Brene Brown. Brene and I don't see eye to eye on a lot of our thoughts, but several of her books have just so many gems of wisdom. And I wanted to share a couple of thoughts from this book with you today. The subtitle of this book says, Letting Go of Who You Think You're Supposed to Be and Embracing Who You Are. In one of her chapters, she talks specifically on shame. There's three things she says about shame. She says, we all have it. We all experience it. So I don't have to have this traumatic past to have something that maybe I have shame about. I don't have to come from, a background that's dramatic. I don't have to have an upbringing that is abusive or severely lacking for me to have things that I have shame about. Number two, she says, is we're all afraid to talk about shame. So we're all afraid to say, I feel this way about myself, and therefore, I don't know how you could perceive me or how you could deem me lovable. And the third is that the less we talk about shame, the more control it has over our lives. And in the great scheme of things, Brene Brown says that shame is basically the fear of being unlovable. So, in a nutshell, I'm afraid to tell you about myself, about this area of myself where I have shame. Because number one, I deem it an area of my life that's unlovable or an area that I don't want to have. Therefore, my shame comes in my inability to predict how you will react to what I have to tell you. All of us have lived in that spot. All of us have these areas where we have the ability to either sit in that shame and keep it to ourselves, where it prevents us from really being free and being comfortable with the greatness of who we are, in our weaknesses, in the parts of ourselves that we're not too proud of. But the minute we let go of that shame by either confiding in somebody else, or even just exposing our story through maybe writing about it or talking about it, there's more of a freedom that we begin to experience. But it takes a lot of courage to make that initial proclamation of this is who I am. And the question that kind of comes around shame, and if shame is something that you're having a hard time pinpointing in your life, it kind of goes with this question: what will people think? So you can look at that question and tag it back to something in your life. Where is an area where I ask myself, what will people think if they know this about me? What will people think if they know this about my parenting? What will people think if they know this about myself as a daughter of Christ, or myself as a mother, or my role in business? Like, what will people think? And I think that it takes a lot of courage for us to move past that question to a courageous, Well, it is who I am. And therefore, whoever I'm befriending, whoever I'm looking to be in friendship with, I need this person to understand that the fullness of me and me being vulnerable is me also being able to share this area of shame and put it out there. And it takes true courage for me to await your reaction. Because I think that there's countless times in our lives where we have refused to be vulnerable with somebody because we're afraid of what they might say. And we're afraid of losing that person. We're afraid of looking unlovable. You know, there's so many times in my life that I have withheld myself, that I have been afraid of being who I was because I just wanted to be comfortable. I think that's probably, for me, that's where I equate shame is, you know, being comfortable, not rocking the boat, you know, not having to have eyes on me for a reason that I don't want. But I remember giving a retreat, a Kairos retreat when I was in high school. And I remember talking on this idea of shame, and it was kind of tied into the virtue of piety. At the time, I remember having to talk about my dad being bipolar. And my family it's been an area that I think has a lot of shame attached to it. You know, my dad has definitely done some things when he's been manic that have been really tough for all of us. And as a child, I lived through some times that my father was very depressive. And I think when you're in elementary school and you're a child, you just want your family to be happy. You just want to give this presentation that everything's fine. You want your dad to be like everybody else. And I was in grade school when my dad first had a big episode and was hospitalized. And I remember knowing that my family was different from other families, and what our family was going through, nobody would understand. And my mom wasn't really talking about it. My mom wasn't sharing it. And therefore, I didn't feel like I could share it. And in the typical elementary school way that you handle things that are going on in your family that you don't know how to handle, I did this thing with a couple of my girlfriends, and we had poured glue on our hands in the middle of class. So my teacher is giving this lecture, and I'm pouring glue on my hands just to kind of make it peel, you know, that thing you do when you're in elementary school. And my teacher was just, you know, she made this big deal about how she could not believe that I was doing this in class, and this was so out of my character, and just really shamed me in front of my other classmates. And when I went to the principal's office, it was the same thing. There was this shame of, you know, I can't believe you, of all people, would do this. And they really fed into this ideal of me being an ideal student. You know, they really fed into, they tried to kind of shame me for, I would say, kind of stooping this low in misbehavior. And that was the first time that I was able to break down and share what was happening behind the doors of my house. And I remember just crying to the principal and saying, this is what's happening in my home. You know, my dad is not living there, and my house is so different. And my mom is having to do stuff for my dad, and we're not supposed to talk about it, but, you know, this is our life. You know, something like bipolar, that doesn't go away. And you deal with that the rest of your life. And I remember when I went on to high school and I was sharing this concept of shame, and I was sharing this concept, that those were some of the things that came flooding back was, what will people think? You know, will they think that that means I'm going to be bipolar because this is in my family? What will my future boyfriends think? Will they be afraid to want to be with me because mental health is now an issue? Those are real life areas, that there was just sort of easier to kind of put a black tent over it and pretend like it wasn't happening and pretend like it wasn't happening in my family. But the fact of the matter is, it was a trauma that I was living. Shame can also come as a fear of being unlovable because of an area of your life that you really have no control over. An area of shame that I would like to talk about today and to share with you, I think, is a struggle that a lot of women have that we don't necessarily know how to talk about. When I was in high school, I started having extremely bad periods, and I didn't know how to handle them. I didn't know if maybe I wasn't very tough, and so these extremely tough cramps that I would have every month was normal for everybody else. I didn't know if people dealt with what I was feeling. And I was kind of ashamed to talk about it because I felt like other people wouldn't understand. When I was in high school, about 2 days a month, I would be absent from class. And I was a very good student. But for 2 days of a month, I would sit in a dark room. I would be extremely nauseated. The smell of anything would get me throwing up. And it became such an issue in my home, especially in my junior and my senior year of high school, that my parents just assumed that 2 days a month I would feel this way. So it was typically the first and second day of my period. And then the remainder of my 7-day cycle, I'd be back at school and I could handle it. But those first 2 days, I really lived in this area of shame. I didn't want any of my friends to know that I was experiencing this. My mom had taken me to a doctor for irritable bowel syndrome. We thought that I had that, and we thought I had IBS. I would have extreme nausea and extreme diarrhea. I didn't want to talk about it. I didn't want to share that this was happening to me. I didn't understand how other girls could have their periods and go to school. When I went to college, it got worse. The same thing happened when I went to college. And it was easier to hide since I wasn't in class every day. But as I began to really share myself in a different way with people who I lived with, away from my own home life where I had grown up, when I began to really share this area of shame, especially with two girls that I had grown extremely close to, I remember both of them saying to me, I don't have that. I don't have anything like that. And it made me start to really question what was going on with my body. How is it that the more I shared this area, the more women were saying to me, no, I don't have that happen. I don't experience half those symptoms that you had. And it really, being courageous and being able to say to these women, hey, these are my symptoms. This is what I experienced 2 days a month. And having them really refute this part of me that was ashamed that my body was reacting this way. These women really encouraged me to seek out doctor's help, to really kind of move beyond myself and move beyond, wanting to act like I wasn't hiding in my room twice a month, to saying something is wrong here. It didn't end up being until after I saw a gynecologist and I talked to them about my symptoms. They wanted to put me on birth control, which I refused. And as I began to date my current husband, these issues continued to happen. And, being able to kind of share that same amount of guilt with him and say, I don't know why this happens to me, you know, but twice a month, this is how I feel. It was later when we were married, I made this connection. Everyone had asked us, if we were trying to get pregnant right away. And we both were. We both wanted, children. And for the first 2 years that we tried to have children, we just couldn't. And it was a monthly disappointment. And I remember this one day I was over the stove. I think it might have been stirring chili or something. And I just felt this immense pain. It kind of felt like someone took a sword and shoved it through my back and yanked it out. And I couldn't straighten my back and I couldn't move and I was screaming. And it was at that point that it was figured out that I probably had ruptured a cyst somewhere in my uterus. And that began a journey for me of figuring out the name endometriosis and understanding that, this is something that when I put myself out there and I went to a fertility specialist, because at that time they didn't have NAPRO doctors that I was aware of, but I went to this fertility specialist and they took an ultrasound picture and they could see the size, the enormous size of my ovary, and knew that I was struggling with endometriosis and knew that this was an area that I probably struggled with probably struggled with the most because I got my period when I was 10 years old. So it wasn't surprising that if endometriosis was something that came shortly after, that at 7 or 8 plus years of menstrual cycles, that I was starting to experience the effects of endometriosis and what it was doing to my uterus. And just all of the hormones that came along with that made me feel fatigued and nauseous and all these extreme things that I was dealing with. But being able to kind of shed a light on that and to say, something's not right here. And I don't want people to know this about me. There's a shame in being able to say, hey, I don't know what's going on with me. I don't know why I can't have kids. I don't know what's happening to my body. I don't know why I feel like my body is not doing what it's supposed to do. Shortly after I had my first surgery, which was a laparoscopy, where during that surgery they go in and they just surgically kind of burn everything out, and that surgery was supposed to be an hour, but it actually ended up being 4 hours. My poor husband, they don't know because they can't see it. So they didn't know the effect of the endometriosis on, a 20-some-year-old body that had been undergoing endometriosis for over 10 years. And I share this with you because, there's always that fear. When I've shared about endometriosis before, there's always that fear of how people will kind of judge what I'm saying. I remember when I was in high school, I used to always think like, what if people think that I'm being a baby? What if people think I'm making this up? Same thing in college. What if people think that, I'm just not tough, that I just can't handle this, and then moving kind of away from that and saying, this is a real problem. This is a real thing that I'm dealing with. And this is also a part of who I am. And being able to kind of move past that into my own physical freedom. Since then, I've had another surgery. I had it just a couple of years ago because I started having the same effects again. So it's just that compounding time of where an endometriosis can just grow because it never really kind of goes away. And, eventually I know that when it starts to get bad again, that I will need to have a hysterectomy. That will be something that awaits me. And I think that we need to be willing, here I am talking about endometriosis. But I think we also need to be able to look at other areas of our life that we ask ourselves that question. What will people think? I have to laugh because I am a lot different from people who I know. At 44, I still like to wear braids. I still like to sport a bandana. Sometimes I can be found rapping in my car to 90s music. I don't always fall into a rhythm of what a mom of five should look like. I can live under the shame of that, or I can just be comfortable with who I am and make other people comfortable with who they are. And that's one of the reasons I started blogging years ago, was to be able to kind of afford people this outlet where they could hear someone else being vulnerable, somebody else saying, these are my struggles, somebody else saying, this is what's happening in my marriage, somebody else being willing to, kind of be courageous and put themselves out there with the hope that it brings life to something that you're doing in your life. That somehow me sharing areas of my life where I have shame, or areas of my life where people have made me feel shame because they question who I am, or they question why I'm doing something, that can also kind of lead to a struggle for freedom. But, today, just to wrap this up, my prayer for all of us is that we really sit back in our identity and we say, Lord, give me the freedom to put myself out there in holy boldness, with courage, knowing that those who need to hear what I'm saying are going to love me anyway. That my lovability comes from a deep place of who I am and who you made me. And I am lovable just because I'm your daughter. I'm lovable. And I need to move past creating a sense of who I am based on what I think others are comfortable. Because when it comes down to it, that's not truly who I am. And I think as we get older, 44, as we get older, we start to kind of begin to confidently live who we want to be. And my goal here with Little with Great Love is to restore the way you see yourself. If you're watching this and you're in your teens or you're in your 20s, I would love for you to have the confidence that I have now. I would love for you to sit in an area of comfortability, to live courageous, to not be shamed, to not be who you want to be, but to go boldly, to embrace yourself as a daughter, knowing that so many people in your generation are so confused by their identity. They're so wrapped up in who Instagram tells them they have to be, or who this PC world says is the appropriate way to act. That's not who you were called to be. God has a plan for you. He has a vocation for your life. But ultimately, He's made you who you are. And you're necessary in this world. And you're needed. And you're needed to be bold and to be courageous. Thanks so much for being with me today. I really just want so much freedom for all of us. So, shame. We all have it. The more we talk about it, the less hold it has on us. Be blessed.